So Shemar Stewart, we've mentioned his name a few times. He is just an athletic freak. Compared to Myles Garrett, they are very similar athletically. The difference is he has none of the numbers to back it up. So it's really a gamble on, do you think this guy can develop and into a player that can be a double-digit sack guy? Because he hasn't shown it. He hasn't been able to do that in his entire college career. And not to mention he's had other guys on that defensive line, like the Nick Scortons of the world and the other Stewart, to kind of help bolster up that defensive line. So you would have expected him to have gotten more production. Turns out he didn't. In the statistics that matter, like sacks, he had a lot of pressures. He just never got home, and that's usually a thing that the glaring issue with that is that he's a guy that's very raw, and we've already dipped our toes into that water with Myles Murphy. He's a guy that was very raw, and we haven't been able to prove that we can develop those types of players. So this is a pick that would make me very, very nervous for the future of the team. It's banking on a lot of things going right moving forward. But, man, if it does, then you have to imagine, like, if you do end up getting that development out of Stewart, that you might be able to get it out of Myles Murphy too, and you just get that ball rolling on the defensive line, and you've got a two-headed monster there for the future. You still got maybe Trey coming back. And he's also a guy that can line up all over the line too. Like I said, physically, a lot like Myles Garrett, who predominantly is on the edge but can line up inside and passing down situations, things like that. I mean, it would be a very risky pick. And we've had conversations about the Bengals making risky picks last season. Very risky draft. Some hits, some misses, some unfortunate breaks. But that's what it's going to take, right? I think that's what we're going to have to be able to really make a leap forward and get back to where we want to be. So in one respect, I love the aggressiveness and the riskiness of this sort of pick. At the same time, it's, oh my gosh, how far back does this set us back if it doesn't work out? And that's just the risk that you have to weigh. I'm looking at the rest of the draft. Some guys that were available, like Jihad Campbell was there. I would have been happy with that. Derek
listed
Harmon.
as a linebacker, I would say Jihad Campbell is a better edge rusher than Stewart.
Yeah, at this moment, I would agree with you.
How many sacks did Stewart have last year? 4, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Jihad Campbell had 5 in one game at edge rusher against LSU.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have such a hard time drafting players without production. I mean, you see 6'6", 290, you think maybe if he can't edge rush, he can be a difference maker on the inside. Maybe that versatility can give us some help there when we need pass rush so bad. But I have a really hard time not adding pass rush in free agency and then drafting a guy who hasn't shown consistent pass rush.
Yeah, like there's out of looking at the rest of the guys that were taken later on in the draft, there's players that I feel more comfortable with their production being more ready for week 1 than I do with Shemar Stewart. James Pierce was there.
He might not go first round, which is nuts.
Yeah, that's crazy. Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon, those are a couple names there that I would feel much more comfortable taking in round 1 with their production, with their readiness at the NFL level. We already mentioned Jihad Campbell. Nick Emmanwori was right there as well.
We had a meeting with him yesterday.
Yeah, that's an interesting name too that I think, could play that box safety role for us too.
I do think picks like that kind of got eliminated, sadly. Like, I would have loved to take a Nick Emmanwori. I see people in the chat talking earlier today about potentially, I'm blanking on his name, the tight end, Tyler Warren from Penn State. All these guys that we talked about, even, the take I had about if he's there, heck, why not take Ashton Genty at 17? All that stuff, at least in my opinion, is out the window because we've entered into my nightmare for the NFL draft for the Bengals, and it's you have to draft for need. We're going into the draft without a pass rush. You have to take a pass rusher, and you have to take a guard that you're confident in starting week 1. You have to leave the draft with those two things, which means you have to get those two things in the first 3 rounds. So 2 of your 3 picks, maybe 3 of your 3 picks are decided. Say they take Walter Nolan in the first round. That's an interior pass rusher. You're probably at the top of your list looking at guard and edge rusher in the second round. And then in the third round, the opposite of the guard or edge rusher. Like, they're going into the draft, and this is where I think their free agency has hurt them the most. They're going into the draft with what we talked about yesterday, and I don't even think it's one hand tied behind their back. I think it's both. Every single team in the entire league knows that the Bengals at 17 are taking a pass rusher. If we need one, we got to get above them. So that really, really scares me going into draft night, because everyone in the entire world knows what the Bengals need, and the Bengals have no other option but to draft it.
And the other scenario here too, that I know these mock draft analysts, Mel Kipers, they don't usually predict trade backs or trade ups. I do think that the Bengals at this current moment are one of the best candidates for a trade back right now, because they need those extra picks. Like we said, they're going into it with a lot of needs that just need to be addressed. They have to be addressed. You got to get some pass rush in there. You have to get the 2 guard spots right now. 2. We expect them to get one, but
like, there's no way, right? There's no way they go into the draft with this.
That's what I'm afraid of. Like,
I think we're down to like 5 total signings for the Bengals in this era after this date. It's like La'el Collins, Mackenzie Alexander, a bunch of depth pieces. Von Bell in 2020 was after this point, so I guess some difference makers, but not huge names.
Right, and I think some of the guys in free agency, I know we're getting a little off topic here, but they are purposely waiting for their opportunities. I think the longer they wait, the better of an outcome they're going to get. But yeah, I mean, you're going to ask, do I like Shemar Stewart or not? It's going to fill a need, and it might be able to fill 2 needs if it works out, but it's very risky. It's very risky. I personally, when I do my mock drafts in my mind, when I do them on the simulators and things like that, Shemar Stewart is right there at my second or third option. Like I said before, I listed some of the names that are more NFL ready, but man, if you can hit on him, right? If you can actually develop him into that, you get a ceiling of Myles Garrett. Like, that athleticism, you're not going to find anywhere else. So that's just like the risk you got to take. Can you develop? Can you not? And it goes back to the age-old question. You got to hit in the draft.
Yeah.
And we've had that same theme in this show for years now.
I will say, I think if Shemar Stewart is there at 17, he will be the Bengals pick.
Yeah.
I'm fairly confident in that. So I'm hoping someone in the first 16 picks really, really loves Shemar Stewart.
Yeah, that's the other thing, too, is, like, I don't know how the NFL views him because there's...
His testing numbers are Myles Garrett. It printed out a paper, and it was Shemar Stewart, Myles Garrett, same numbers. Myles Garrett had 34 sacks at A&M. Shemar Stewart had 4. How do you grade that?
Yeah, even if Shemar Stewart had half of what Myles Garrett had, he would be a top 5 pick right now in the NFL. He would be a top 5 pick. He would 100% be up there with the top guys. But because of that production, it's a scary proposition. I think, like I said, we have to see what they do the rest of free agency, because if they go into it with 2 guards missing, you got to be more safe than that. But yeah, I mean, that's my thoughts on Shemar Stewart.
And that goes back to what we talked about. Like last year, we talked about how many chances they took. They went after talented guys in the draft, but every one of them had some things about them that you're like, well, do you ignore that red flag? Do you ignore this? Do you ignore that? Like, the Bengals were aggressive last year and it backfired. And then you haven't been aggressive in free agency. You were aggressive finally and got the Jamar and T deal done. But, in my opinion, I thought that keeping Jamar was always part of the plan. But by agreeing to keep T. Higgins with it, it put them in position where they now have to be perfect moving forward. They have to hit on every draft pick. They have to hit on every move in free agency. So at this point, is gambling on a guy smart if you're the Cincinnati Bengals? And it's one of those, if you do it, he better hit. This is the write-up that Mel Kiper has on Shemar Stewart, the defensive end from Texas A&M. who he has the Bengals taking at number 17 in his latest mock draft that he just put out yesterday. He says Stewart is one of his LTP guys, he looks the part guys, all right? So he says his physical traits, as we know at the Combine, will get the interest of teams seeking pass rushers. You guys brought it up, Jacob. He leaped 40 inches in the vertical jump, ran a 4.5 in the 40, but will the traits translate into production in the pros? His 4.5 sacks over 3 college seasons are unexpected from a player of his talent. And that's the write-up, basically all the summary of what you guys had already mentioned about him. But that's going to be the big question is, should the Bengals be aggressive with that type of move? And by the way, I don't know which one of you said it. Do the Bengals trade back? Do they trade back for more picks? Is that a Bengals move in your opinion?
No, not a Bengals move at all. I'm trying my absolute hardest not to do it ever in mock drafts or off-season talk. It is the dream. It is the absolute dream. There is no reason that I can wrap my head around why the Bengals wouldn't consider trading back. The way the board falls to 17, I assume Jackson Dart's going to be there as the third quarterback on the board. I assume at least one of those wide receivers is going to fall. I think tackles might go a little later than we expect with Will Campbell's arms coming in as short as they were. This board is going to fall in a very surprising way come the end of April. So I would love the Bengals to trade back. I don't think 6 picks is nearly enough to improve this team to where it needs to get with the offseason we've had so far. So to pick up an extra second rounder or an extra third rounder or maybe even both, depending on how far the team's moving up and how much they're willing to give, I would love the Bengals to trade back. It's just not something they do. But until 48 hours ago, extending 2 wide receivers wasn't something they did either. So maybe I can be more optimistic now that they've gotten some other stuff done that they don't usually do and start planning on trade backs. I would absolutely love it. I think it's what the Bengals should be targeting, but I would be shocked if that came to fruition.
Yeah, the only recent memory one, which we've talked about this draft class a ton, was when they traded back with the Bills and got the offensive tackle, and then that was the same draft they got the center, Ohio State guy.
Billy Price.
Price is wrong.
Yeah.
Price was actually pretty right. We got B.J. Hill for, 6 years?
Yeah. It eventually worked out. But you get my point. They got burnt by it once, so they're usually very risk adverse when it comes to getting burnt by things like that. But we'll see. I mean, it doesn't take a lot for you to trade back, and then if things start to fall in a negative way where you're losing the defensive tackles, the edge rushers that you were looking for, you can always trade back up. You can always trade back up and get the guy that you want. But that's just not usually something the Bengals do. But I personally think that the smartest moves that they could make is trading back 5 spots, get that extra third-round pick, be able to give yourself a little more wiggle room in terms of not being, forced into a pick at pick 17. And, also they need to make some more moves in free agency. I mean, they just can't go into it with the amount of holes that they have on this roster. But, I think that there's still some moves left to be made for the Bengals. That's the end point of this, is that there's still some things that they need to take care of before the draft, before we're super comfortable with making the Shemar Stewart picks of the world.
Are you locked in on defense or bust? Has to be defense in the first round now.
I think that it is the way that the draft has shook out with the offensive guards where they're slated at, that, it doesn't make any sense.
I don't think we were ever going to take a guard in the first round, right? Like a Booker or a Ratledge. Like, they were never 17, maybe tackle and move him in there. But I think offensively, the people we were really hung up on were the Lovelands and the Warrens of the world that could have really been fun additions. Or even, we threw out Ginty in this room for a little bit. I think that ship is gone. The luxury pick ship has sailed. There's no way you can justify that. I did see David Shaw in our chat here recommend that the Bengals maybe trade up instead of trading back, and that is something I could not possibly disagree with more. With all due respect, I think the Bengals thing they need most right now is assets. They need more picks, not less picks, and to give up a second or third rounder, to give up 49 to move up, 6 or 7 spots. I think that would be one of the worst moves the Bengals could make. I think they already have the difference makers they need, especially with the assumption Trey Hendrickson's going to be playing on this team next year. I would love to get a difference maker. I absolutely would. And I think one's going to be on the board at 17. So I do not think the Bengals have to move up. And I would even go as far to say I think that would be a very bad move for the Bengals this offseason, regardless of who they got.